Hey everyone, welcome to PunkCast. My name is William Maxwell. I'm a student of Web3 and the owner of Punk485. Cryptopunks are 10,000 uniquely generated characters stored permanently on the Ethereum blockchain. No punk is the same. This is a show dedicated to celebrating the punks behind the punk. My hope for this podcast is that we capture the essence of the punk culture, elevate the brand and the individual behind the punk. One last thing. Projects discussed on the show is not financial advice. Crypto and NFTs are a volatile and risky asset class. Please always do your own research. Other than that, let's go. Hi, and welcome back to PunkCast. Today we've got Punk485, our first dev punk. He's a 480, sporting a headband, earring, big beard, and 3D glasses. He's one of the most purest punks and art collectors out there, with some spicy takes on royalties and value extraction in the NFT space. Please welcome OMZ to the show. OMZ, how are you? And welcome.
Hey, Will, thanks for the very generous introduction. I'm purist and I probably hold back on like 90% of what I actually want to say. But it's great to be here and thanks for having me on.
No, it's a pleasure. Yeah, we'll have to sort of dig into it, and hopefully I can get some of the uncensored takes on this podcast. But maybe maybe you could just start us off with, I guess, your name, like OMZ. How did you come up with it? What does it sort of mean?
I mean, for me, it's just I associate it with the unit of electrical resistance. It's a symbol that's always been kind of important to me. I don't know, for whatever reason. And it's also kind of been a nickname of mine. So I kind of it was the first thing I thought of when I created my Twitter account a couple of years ago for NFTs. I didn't really think that much about it, but that's where it came from.
It's cool. And so maybe you can just share a little bit about yourself, I guess your backgrounds and, what brought you sort of into NFTs.
Sure. Well, my background, I've been in tech for most of my career. I've launched a bunch of startups, all kinds, from like software to wearable tech. I've even launched artist collective in the past, things like that. Very wide range. I also write on the side, and I'm a creative director for every company I've started. That's kind of the role I've played. I'm not crypto native. So a lot of the stuff I've been learning as I go. So I'm not a trader. I'm not into the finance side of things like maybe a lot of people are. So for me, it's always educational. And I came into NFTs by accident, really. I was following a couple of accounts on Twitter. Jason Williams was one of them, going parabolic. And he posted, I think he was bidding at an auction for Trevor Jones' piece, which was Picasso's Bull, which is one of his most iconic artworks. And I really liked it. I thought, wow, that's really cool. So I started following Trevor. I ended up buying one of his prints. He had a limited edition run of those prints. I bought one of those and continued to follow him. And then he started teasing a project that he was dropping with like these images of Batman. And I'm a huge fan of Batman. I've always been a fan of Batman. So it really caught my eye. And he started talking about digital art, and I wasn't familiar with any of this stuff, but I really, really wanted to get my hands on one of these images that he was pushing. So I ended up jumping in, basically diving into this auction, not knowing what I was getting myself into. I had to learn how to use MetaMask on the fly, and it ended up being a really crazy auction. Ended up winning edition number 10 of The Protector, which is one of the two different artworks he created along with Jose Delbo, which is, who's been a big comic artist for a long time. And that was my first NFT. That was kind of my introduction to the space. So as cliche as it sounds, I literally did come for the art.
I do remember that time. That would have been sort of late 2020, sort of back in like November, December. Is that right?
That's right. Actually, my 2-year anniversary was like 4 or 5 days ago. That dropped. So about 2 years. Yeah. So middle of October.
I see. Yep. No, well, happy 2-year anniversary, mate. And And Jason, if I remember correctly, he was a staunch Bitcoin guy, right?
Yeah, he still is. But I mean, to be fair to him, I mean, I think he discovered Ferocious. Him and I forgot his name, but Anthony
Popliano. Yeah.
I think they discovered Ferocious, to be fair, and that's kind of like, so I got my introduction to digital art through following them. But again, I mean, this by pure coincidence. But yeah, it was. I'm very grateful to have discovered it.
It's funny. I came in exactly the same way. So I was subscribing to Pomp and his news feed for a while, and he was showing. I think it was Ferocious. It was the dinner one.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember what that was called, but he was showing that, and I was just curious about it. And I think I went to find my way into Nifty Gateway and sort of found about NFTs that way. But yeah, so like with you, I mean, like, how, talk us through, I guess, that sort of process then. What were you sort of thinking at the time when you first saw, I guess, the concept of NFTs from Jason, that actually led you to, buying your first NFT? And just out of curiosity, the Batman was your first NFT from Trevor Jones?
Yeah, the Protector. Yeah, that's right. Number 10 out of 10.
How much was that going for at the time?
Man, I mean, I could have bought a lot of punks for what I paid for it. I didn't know. It went for 16 ETH in auction, so it was a pretty heavy bidding war.
Yeah,
but for an edition of 10, that's quite a big number.
Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't know any better at the time. I was still counting in dollars, So. Yeah, but look, I mean, for me, I've always been interested in art. I studied art in high school, but I never did anything with it. And then, like I mentioned, I play the role of a creative director for every company I've started. And so a lot of that entails dealing with designers, spending a lot of time browsing through portfolios on Behance and Dribble and these kind of websites, which frankly is very similar to browsing art on SuperRare or Foundation. You're just looking through images and picking things you like. So that process was already kind of familiar to me. And I collect rare books. I've always had a collecting bug. I think a lot of people, you just like kind of have this predisposition to collecting, and for me it was old books, rare books. So when I came across this, it just clicked in my head right away. I just understood, because I think when you experience a sense of ownership over something that is rare or scarce, I think that's kind of a universal feeling, whether it's NFTs or something physical. And so it was a very natural thing for me. I didn't think twice. I didn't question it. Yeah.
So a couple of questions. One, a little bit just to sort of clarify as well. When you say creative director for tech companies, is that sort of more the front end UI UX direction, or the creative side of that?
It's honestly, it's everything from the branding and identity to the kind of visual language which emerges from that, and then extends to the UI. The UI is a bit more granular, but you think of it like, designing the personality of the business or the brand and all the things that go into that. So it's very design oriented, it's very art oriented. A lot of it is like, it's subjective. It's like a lot of gut instinct, right? Like, I can't really explain to you why I like certain designers over others. Sometimes it's just a feeling.
That's cool. So talk to me a little bit about book collecting. I mean, I've never met anybody that's collected books before. Like, what kind of books do you collect, and how do you actually collect them? Do they carry a lot of value now as well? Like, is there a big market for rare books?
I mean, they can. I mean, obviously they're very illiquid, but there is a market. There is a website, I think it's called Abe's Books, where it's a huge marketplace for old books. For me, I'm a big reader. I've always been a big reader, so I've got hundreds of books in my home office, and so I really respect and value that tradition. And I just find, I mean, the books that I focused on were already they're quite visual. So, let's say 100 years ago, or even further back, a lot of writers and publishers, what they do is they'd go and they'd hire a famous artist or illustrator and get them to hand draw illustrations into the books to accompany the actual text. So if you think of it, it's like getting a novel and then having like 10 illustrations, like beautiful hand painted illustrations as part of that inside the book. So it's I mean, I find these things quite beautiful. And then you talk about the binding and the cover and the materials. And then the idea, in a way, like kind of the physical provenance. Some of these books have personal notes written into the inside cover. Someone wrote like 100 years ago to someone that they care about, or something with a special message. I don't know, if I kind of like that stuff. So yeah, I mean, you can buy some of these books go for 5-6 digits. I haven't bought books that expensive, but they can go for that that amount. And it really depends. Like for example, if there's a book you really love, it'd be cool to own a first edition of that book. But yeah, I can't actually put a finger. I can't really remember how it started for me, but I know that by the time I discovered digital art, I had already, collected like 30 or 40 rare books, and most of them from like little bookstores in New York, in New York City, little old bookstores, which is again a cool experience, because it's a very nice way to discover something. You go into one of these little bookstores and you just rummage through the shelves, and you never know what you're going to find. So the experience itself is quite cool. Yeah. And rare nowadays.
It does sound cool. I should probably try and explore a little bit. I'm a little bit intrigued. I'm based here in Hong Kong, so we don't have a lot of space. But I do miss, reading a physical book. I think I'm just forced to read on Kindles and audiobooks now. But I think there is something nostalgic about just picking up a book and just sitting there and just reading and turning the pages. But I think it'd also be pretty cool to read through some of the notes or the messages that have sort of been left there from a long, long time ago, right? So and that's cool.
Yeah.
And so I guess that's how you, had you had an eye for art, naturally, I think, through the work that you're doing. And you also had a bit of a knack for collecting, because you like it. And I could probably see that's, coming across on Twitter as you being a very strong purist collector in the space. And so talk me through, I guess, your first purchase then, and was it easy, or was there a lot of friction for you to get Ethereum and purchase, or was that sort of learning on the fly for you?
I already had some Ethereum, because just being in tech, I got exposed to it. I thought it was really interesting. So I just dabbled a little bit. I bought a little bit and I just held it for a few years. So I already had the Ethereum like in a Coinbase account. And it was a question of, okay, I've got it in Coinbase. How do I actually use it to bid on this piece? It wasn't so bad. I mean, I think it helps, again, if you're already in tech, or if you're already used to user experience design and things like that, and like looking through many different applications, you kind of can figure it out. So it wasn't too bad. But yeah, I mean, Makerspace, where this actually dropped, it also lets you pay by credit card. So I was, I didn't do that. I could have. But it made it a bit more like, I guess, relatable. But yeah, no, the friction wasn't so bad. But I could see how, I mean, even today, like a lot of friends of mine who want to buy their first NFT, or even people who are like in tech themselves, they do struggle with the process, and I think some people it can be quite intimidating. So I also think that there's a mindset there, and an appetite for risk that plays a role into how your willingness to actually dive into these things and try them on.
And so after you bought your first piece of art, your Batman Trevor Jones, like, what was your transition into Cryptopunks? Like, how did you find out about it, and how do you sort of navigate through that?
I think the first time I really became aware of them was when G Money posted that like famous thread, like first week of January. You know, the famous thread when he was talking about why he bought his ape.
Yep.
You know, because that kind of made a splash at the time, and then it intrigued me enough that I started to read, you know, about the history of the collection and Larva Labs and all that stuff, and I thought it was really cool. And then I joined the Discord, you know, a couple of weeks after that, and within 2 days of joining the Discord, I bought my first punk, because I mean, especially at that time, the passion that the guys that were in the Discord had for punks was just off the charts. It's not like how it is today, and I'm not denigrating what, you know, how it is today, because it's different. But at that time, 90% of the conversations were around traits, punk traits, around like punks themselves. People were just geeking out about punks. And so for someone that's, you know, at the time a lurker, just lurking, reading these conversations, you couldn't help but like, it was just infectious. You couldn't help but kind of start to, you know, become excited and passionate about these things, and then start to really relate to what could be so appealing about them. So it was just, yeah, it became super, it was natural then. I didn't even think about it. I just, you know, I still remember, I mean, I was so happy and excited to buy my first one. And the guys, like I said, the guys that were in there, they were great. And it's something I always say, I think it should be like considered a rite of passage for any new punk holders to spend some time and read through the chats. Go to like March 2021 and earlier, you know, just spend some time, read through the conversations. I think you'll see what I mean. And I think it'll also give you a different perspective on the collection and the type of people that really kind of drove punks to where they are today. And I just think it's a really cool experience. And we're lucky that Discord just preserves all of that history. And so people should take advantage of it.
Absolutely. I mean, I probably need to go back and troll through some of that. So just going back to that point in time, do you remember many sort of punk faces that were then hanging out in the early stages of their career that are actually doing something a little bit more different now? Do you remember?
Yeah, like for sure. I mean, like I remember, like, you know, OX113D, the creator of Terraforms.
Yeah.
So they bought their current punk, which is the DOPP punk. They bought it like maybe a couple of days before I bought my current punk. And they were actually, that's how I actually figured out you could buy a DOPP punk from the developers at the time. I didn't know you could. So I still remember that vividly. You know, they put out a bid. I don't remember. I think it was not. I want to say it was 9 ETH for a beautiful wild white, and it hit. The devs accepted it, and so they've obviously come a long way since then. Also, his current punk, he bought it, I think, again, a day or two before I bought mine. He also bought his from the devs. Same thing, threw a bid out there, and the devs accepted. So yeah, I mean, besides those two, I'm sure there are a ton that I'm not remembering, but I mean, there are people who I consider to be like real pioneers and OGs of the punks community. People like Justin Trimble, people like Dave, you know, Snowfro was in and out.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, and really, like, those guys, along with these, they really played a huge role in generating excitement around the collection, educating new people. They were always generous with people. They were always kind. So anytime someone came in wanting to buy their first punk, I mean, these guys were so welcoming and so helpful. I mean, I remember one time, Deez actually bought a punk that someone else wanted, a DOPP punk, and then he realized that this person wanted it, so he sold it back to that person at cost, no questions asked, and it was a beautiful DOPP punk. I mean, so you had that spirit, you had that energy in the Discord that I think it made it so much more appealing to be a part of the community. And we kind of lost that, unfortunately. We kind of lost that, I think, probably from May 2021. For a few months, that we kind of lost that energy in the Discord. And I think it played a role in some of the kind of negativity that was swirling around punks at that time. But these guys, for me, they're legends, and they're obviously still active. They all have their own, most of them have their own projects now. And I'd love for you to get them on PunkCast at some point. Those guys, it would be amazing to hear their stories.
Absolutely. Definitely sort of try and reach out to them. Just out of curiosity as well, when you said the vibe changed in the punk Discord, was it early? Are you saying it early this year or towards the back end of last year? I guess the question is, why do you feel like that sort of changed?
I mean, look, I mean, for me, choose my words carefully here, but we can say post BAYC, around May, June 2021, the energy in the whole space changed. I remember because I saw it from start to finish. I was there when they minted. I was there post mint. I saw how certain people were pumping them, and then at the same time, they were attacking Larva Labs. There was a lot of criticism at Larva Labs at that time. A lot of people just fudding the collection and fudding punks in general. And then within the Discord itself, I mean, the mentality a little bit in the space also changed. Prior to BAYC, it really was about art and innovation. Most people that were there, really, that's what they were into. Okay, there was speculation, some fun speculation on new projects here and there, but it wasn't like the be-all and end-all. It was just fun. But I think it changed the energy and the kind of mentality in the space changed a little bit. It became much more money driven, much more hype focused. And it started to spill over in the punks, where you start to get people coming in who were complaining a lot. They wanted utility. They were criticizing Matt and John because they weren't active in the Discord. Like, it started to just spill over, and it drove away a lot of the guys, like someone like Dave, for example. He's a mod. I don't know if he's still a mod, but he might be. It drove away people like that, who I think were really integral in creating a really like positive environment in the Discord. And so there were a few months there where honestly, I just stayed away myself. I just couldn't, I didn't want to be in there because it became quite toxic.
I sort of missed that whole sort of piece. So I sold mine and then sort of bought back in. That's sort of why I'm a little bit interested. But I am sort of hearing very sort of consistencies from other punks as well. But I guess it's part of, our history and part of, who we are and where we sort of go next, right? But I sort of feel like on a good note, I think there is a fair bit of energy and building going on in the punk community in this bear market. I think a lot of the tourists have exited in some ways, and I think what we're left now is with real settlers in the punk community, and I hope that will continue. Cool. And so maybe let's talk a little bit about your punk collection. I've got your wallet in front of me, and you've got 9 punks, and I can see the prices on them. Most of them are sort of sub 10 ETH, which is kind of crazy. And you've got a Cowboy punk, which I absolutely love. I've been eyeing off the Cowboy punks for quite some time, but they're getting out of my reach. But maybe let's just start with the one that you use as your primary punk, and perhaps if you can just share with everybody, what a dev punk actually is, and then I guess maybe let's go through your traits and how you came around selecting your traits for your primary punk.
Sure. So when Larva Labs launched the collection, they kept 1,000 punks for themselves, the first 1,000. And so any punk you see with a 3-digit number was one of the first 1,000 that they retained. And that's where they got the name. That's why they're referred to as dev punks. Um, in my case, I mentioned earlier that, OX11 3D and these both bought DEF Punks prior to mine. So when I saw that, I was like, wow, like the devs are actually selling punks from their collections. I was like, you know what, let me have a look. So I pulled up their collection. Zombies were out of my reach. So I was like, okay, I want to buy a human punk. Let me see which one I like best, just from the visuals. I didn't think about traits. I didn't think about any of that. So I literally went through all the punks in their collection, and this was the one that resonated the most. I just liked the way he looked.
Mm.
I didn't think about the traits and stuff. I didn't really consider.
It's pretty cool. Like 3D eyeglasses, headband, and big beard. He looks like a huge rugby player.
It's funny, I mean, he's obviously left the space now, but Sartoshi, he used to call him Larry Bird weightlifting at the movies. So
that's very fitting.
Yeah.
That's cool. And then so maybe talk through, I guess, your other sort of punks that you sort of bought. They sort of during the same time, obviously different times are staged along that sort of journey. It looks like you got in very, very early.
I mean, I think I bought all of them within a week period, less than a week or a week, something like that. It was like within quick succession. And my first punk was actually my do-rag Muttonchops gold chain.
Yeah,
that was my first punk actually, and in his case, I just thought the provenance was cool because if you look at the history, he was once owned by Tupac.eth, and Tupac has a bit of a legacy, from what I understand, because he was a little ahead of my time. But he owned some crazy punks, like he owned Cosmo Zombie, he owned another zombie, he owned some really, really great punks, and he just sold them all for a loss. And he just kind of sold them all, like I think he dumped them all in one go and like just disappeared. But I just thought the idea of owning a do-rag gold chain punk that used to be owned by someone called Tupac.eth, I just thought that was kind of cool. And then on the others, I mean, look, for me, a trait that I think is extremely slept on is the green clown hair for females. Because the clown hair is a little different. It's like one of those traits where there's a slight difference between how it is for male punks and how it is for female punks. And if you look at female punks with the green hair, I think there's around 60. So there are actually fewer of those than there are orange sides. But they're not valued that way. And I suspect that will change. Actually, in general, I suspect that female punks are undervalued in general right now and will become more valuable as more traditional art collectors start to look at punks. That's just my perspective, not financial advice, of course.
The green hair definitely sort of pops, and it definitely signals punk vibes, right?
I love them. I mean,
and so maybe just at that point in time, you jumped into the Discord, you were a little bit intrigued about the CryptoPunks, but I mean, you obviously had a lot of conviction, to buy 9 punks in succession. Like, what was it for you that sort of hit home? What did CryptoPunks sort of mean to you?
Actually, I own 10. I sold one, but we'll probably talk about that later. Honestly, even with 10, I was like, man, I want to buy more. No joke. It was when between like, the idea of like, I think G Money's thread was really influential, not just on me, on a lot of people. But then also when you saw the passion and the excitement that people in the Discord had, and you thought about the potential for NFTs and digital art in general, like long term, and the role that punks played in shaping the whole space, and everything about them, it was like one of those things that I was just like this. It was like so obvious to me that these things were going to be prized in some way or another. Then I also looked at who owned them, and for example, I don't think people are aware of who else owns punks, but I'll just give you some examples. Like some of the biggest artists in the space own punks. Like people you might not realize, like X Copy owns a punk, Coldie, Josie, Matt Kane, Pindar Van Armen, Killer Acid, some of the like biggest artists in the space, they own punks. And a lot of them used to use punks as their profile pictures until around in May, June 2021. But prior to that, a lot of these artists. So when you see artists like that, of that caliber, holding a collection like this in that esteem, it says something. That to me, it says something, because I really believe, when you see artists like that valuing another artist's work, I think that's the ultimate compliment. So yeah, my conviction hasn't wavered. Actually, I just think they're great, like monumental collection.
Beautifully said. And so, mate, like, what are you looking at collecting now? Like, what are you collecting? I guess, why do you collect?
Majority of my collection is one-of-one art. That's where I probably spend most of my time. I love that side of this space. To me, it's the most exciting aspect of being in the space, because it's like you see all these new artists, young artists coming in, and you, even by buying one piece, even if it doesn't have to, you don't have to spend a lot of money even, you have such a big impact on someone else's journey, both financially, but also emotionally and morally. Like they get so much juice from connecting with someone and having someone buy their work, artists do. And I think as collectors in the space, that's the biggest impact we can have. We can really make a huge difference to the lives of artists from all over the world. And I've seen it happen time and time again. I mean, like I've seen, like, for example, there's an artist, her name is Panther Gita. She was a waitress in Argentina, like on basically minimum wage or whatever. And she started putting out digital art and she started selling pieces, and now she's completely independent. She's able to fully commit herself to her art, and she's doing amazingly well. And that's one story of many. So for me, that's just so powerful. And you can't get that anywhere else in any field. Like, traditional art, you can't. You don't have access. Here, I can get on DMs with any artist, almost any artist in the space, and have a personal conversation with them, and you can connect on a much deeper level. So that's where I spend most of my attention and most of my focus. I obviously dabble in other collections and other projects too. But yeah, I would say probably 75% of my collection is art.
I sort of said, I really feel that as well. Just another side point around Panther. Really lovely girl. Had a couple exchanges with her as well. She just did that recent drop on Nifty Gateway, which showcased all the artists that were contributing, I guess, to crypto art over the last year or two, which was a really nice drop. And her work's pretty cool too. But I think what you sort of said really resonates with me as well. I don't think there is anything like collecting in this space where you could build that much of an emotional connection with somebody. And it feels a little bit rewarding that you could contribute to, I guess, their life in some ways, right? As a collector. So that's really cool. And then just out of curiosity as well, like when you look at one-of-one art, are there sort of anything in particular that you're looking for? Are you more focused on the story, the artist, the journey, or more from an aesthetic point of view? How do you sort of look through these things?
Yeah, it's tricky, right? Because there's so much out there. I mean, for me, it always starts with an emotional connection. I'll browse Super Rare's market page. If I just connect with a piece emotionally, then I'll dig into it some more. I'll look into the artist, I'll read their story, I'll look up their Twitter, get a feel for who they are, chat with them on DMs, get a feel for like, you know, their passion, their vision, their process, all of these things. And then it's just a gut, it's kind of gut feel, you know? I think a lot of it is like that. It's very emotional. It's very emotionally driven. I would never advise anyone to make business decisions on one-of-one art. I don't think you'll last very long doing that. I think you have to really love the work you're buying and assume that you're not going to resell it. And if you do, it's a bonus if that's something you want to do. But that wouldn't be, and that's never been my primary driver. And frankly, I'll tell you, like, through all the bears, whenever I've hit a tough period, and there have been many in the last 2 years, whenever I look at the collection, the art pieces I've collected, it makes me feel good. It makes me feel better. Because most of them, not all of them, but most of them I bought because I love the work or I love the artist, or there was some positive association with that purchase. You know, versus FOMOing into some PFP collection and then like regretting it 2 weeks later. You know, it's a very different. It's a very different experience. And I know for a lot of people that don't collect one-of-one art, it can be intimidating. I would say this. I'd say first of all, nobody's an expert. Nobody's an expert. So don't feel intimidated. Everyone's kind of guessing and figuring it out as they go. There are no right or wrong answers when it comes to collecting art. You just, you know, do what's true to you and don't worry about it. Nobody's going to judge you. And trust me, like, if you find pieces that you love that are personal to you and you collect a couple, I think you'll just naturally pick it up. You'll naturally pick it up and it'll be one of those things that you'll really enjoy. I just think it's a universal thing.
That's awesome advice, and I'll definitely look at one-on-one art a little bit more closely now, for sure. And when you look back at your NFT career to date, do you have any sort of wins or losses that sort of come to mind that's worth mentioning?
Always, the losses always come to mind first, right? Look, I mean, for me, I'm not a trader. It's not natural to me to trade. I'm more of a hoarder as a collector. So one thing I learned probably the hard way was that, you know, when there is a bull run or when things are, you know, when prices are going up and stuff, take some profit. I think that's a lesson I learned, especially like, you know, last summer. I probably could have taken some profit on certain things that I didn't. That's one lesson. The other lesson is FOMO is the enemy. I've never FOMOed into something. I've never not regretted FOMOing into something, period. Whenever I've bought something because I saw someone talk about it or someone else, you know, or someone post about it, or I thought, oh man, if this thing moons and I don't have one, like whenever I've made a decision on that basis, I've regretted it. Like pretty much every time. So those were the two biggest lessons I learned. It's like, ignore the noise. There's a ton of noise, especially on Twitter, a lot of strong opinions. A lot of people like to make these massive declarations about this collection is a grail and this is the grail and this is a masterpiece and this is blue chip. You know, a lot of it, I mean, frankly, a lot of it, people are kind of just pumping their own bags and, you know, leveraging the fact that they have a couple 100,000 followers, or that they are able to, you know, they go and spend 1,000 ETH on a piece and they know that that's going to make waves. Ignore that stuff. I think it's very important from my experience, my biggest wins and biggest opportunities have always been when I bought things where people aren't looking. You know, so if, you know, I mean, Punks is a good example in that sense. I mean, I went in aggressively quite early before there was really a lot of commotion and excitement about them. But there are other things too. One-of-one art, there are a lot of examples of that where, you know, I've bought artists relatively early on and then few months later, they're selling pieces for, you know, multiples of what I paid for them. And it's been because my nature is to be contrarian. So when I see a lot of people flock towards something, I go the other way. And sometimes that's cost me. Like I could have made more money potentially if I had just followed the momentum. But in the long run, my biggest wins have always been by kind of finding those hidden gems or looking at projects that are being ignored by the majority.
And I think your track record speaks for itself, well, I guess with your level of conviction on Cryptopunks, mate. So really good advice. And when you look across, I guess, the Twitter space, who would your favorite punk personality be?
I can't pick one. That's the thing. It's a blessing, right? Like we're very lucky. I think we have so many personalities that I think are great. I mentioned those artists. For me, that's massive that we have that many artists that own punks, even if they don't use them as their profile picture. But then if you know, you look at, again, I relate a lot more to the art space, but you look at some of the you know, best collectors, in my opinion, in the space. I mean, they're all big punks holders. Like Token Angels, for me, is number one. Number one collector in every aspect by far. And I don't think he gets enough credit for that. But if you see his punks collection, it's epic. He's got like some of the most, you know, incredible punks. So for me, that guy is just on his own, is a league of his own. But then you have so many other collectors, people like Bharat, you know, Batsu Pyam has a great punks collection, even though I know he doesn't use one as his profile picture. And then you have guys like RD Hands and Art Pleb, who are really great art collectors. Like these guys, they both have fantastic eyes for art, and they're CryptoPunk holders, and they use their punks as their profile pictures. And I think that represents us very well. People like Capricar as well. I'm a huge fan of his because I think he's really stand-up guy, and he really represents punks well. And he's also like really supportive of artists. So I could give you a really, really long list. I mean, and like I said, that's a blessing for anyone that's part of this community, to be connected to these, you know, people of this caliber. You know, and the guys I mentioned at the very start, Justin Trimble, he was a huge support for me personally when I entered the space, and he still is, and he's a huge advocate for CryptoPunks, and Dave as well. Some of my favorite people in this space. So.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I think Token Angels, he's I mean, I always look at his collection, what he's buying. He absolutely has a fantastic eye for picking up quality pieces early on. So I think he got me onto Matt Kane, Sirazuka in the earlier sort of days as well. So yeah, good shout outs. And if you were to describe punk culture in a few words, how would you describe it?
I mean, the things that come to mind, first, conviction, but that's more for the guys that have been holding their punks for like 4 years and just have unwavering belief in the value and what they represent, and honestly could have cashed out at any time. They have, a lot of these guys have had multiple opportunities to just dump everything anytime they want to, and they haven't done it. And that for me is the way to lead by example. You know, when you see someone who owns 50 or 100 punks and has owned them since 2017 and hasn't dumped, given all the things that have happened over the last year or so, like, I think that's a huge vote of confidence. So that's a big one. But also art and innovation. You know, I mean, I personally, I look at CryptoPunks as an art collection. I don't look at it as a PFP collection. I think it's first example of generative, of a, you know, you could say long form generative art collection that ever existed. And reminiscent of, like, you know, Andy Warhol's like Marilyn Monroe portraits. I mean, so art is a big thing, and innovation. I mean, look at all the various ways that the Larva Labs and CryptoPunks influenced and shaped the space as we know it. So those are the three key words for me.
Awesome. And if you could pass on a message to the next owner of your punk, what would you like to say to them?
I would say, before you do anything, take the time to study the history of the collection, the community. Go back and read some of these old conversations in Discord. Really, you won't really appreciate the value of what you have until you do that work. And I think that's very important. I think I'm a big believer in like valuing history and valuing the people that laid the foundations for what we're able to enjoy today. And so that would be my biggest word of advice, is take the time to connect with what your punk represents. It's not just a PFP, you know, it's a unique work of art that represents innovation and conviction in this space. And I think it's important to really value that and understand that.
Beautifully said, Om. I think you've just given me chills down my spine. I think I want to go out and buy some more Cryptopunks now. But hey, Ohms, this has been super fun just to have a conversation with you. And you know, obviously, you're very thoughtful in terms of how you approach collecting art and what CryptoPunks means to you. And definitely, you're an asset, I guess, to the punk community in terms of singing. I guess the values and expressing them in meaningful ways. And so thank you for joining PunkCast for an episode. But I guess just throwing it over to you, any sort of final closing comments, and I guess how can people find you?
Best way to find me is on Twitter. My DMs are open, so I will 99, unless you're shilling art, I will respond to you. So don't message me to shill something. If you genuinely want to talk about anything, if you're interested in getting to one-of-one art, you don't know where to start. If you have questions about, I don't know, anything related to punks or anything in general, please feel free. I'm a resource to everyone, not just in the punks community, but obviously this is directed towards them. And that's it. I mean, enjoy. I think we're really lucky. I think we're all really lucky to be in this space this early on and to be a part of this community. And that's all. I mean, thanks, Will, for having me on. Really enjoyed it. I think it's great what you're doing. And there are, we've got some really, really great members in this community. So I'm looking forward to hopefully hearing you, have a PunkCast with them as well in the future.
Definitely. Thank you for the words. And guys, that wraps up PunkCast for another week. And we'll be back next week with a new punk. Bye for now.